And the adults amongst us have got a bit of a head start this week because we're spending our time continuing in the book of 1 Kings, which is where in this room we've been in for the last 3 weeks. I know children next door, you've been looking at some other things. And you might want to grab a Bible and go to page 358 if you've got one near you. Do grab one of those. And 1 Kings 17. And we're not going to read the story now. We're going to kind of tell the story as we go on through our time together. But there's the page number. Just give you a moment to get that. And the key thing to know in our story today is that people are hungry. They're absolutely starving. Not just your kind of tummy rumbling as you're waiting for a snack in the middle of the morning. I found this morning I didn't bring a snack with me today. I've been out most of the day. No snack this morning. Tummy was rumbling until I went for a very nice Wetherspoons lunch with Dan. So that's filled me up fine. But these people weren't just a little bit hungry. They were properly starving. And the situation is that there is an evil king. We heard about him last week in here. An evil king who's called Ahab. He's in charge, and he's an evil king. There we go, thumbs down. And he's not a good king because he's leading the people away from following God. And they've been told to follow God, and yet they're worshipping other gods, pretend gods, because this king has told them to do so. And it's a really, really sad time. It feels hopeless as their whole country is led away from following God. And then this man arrives, who's a messenger from God called Elijah. And in here we touched on him a little bit last week, very briefly. And Elijah is a prophet, a messenger from God. And he comes and speaks to the king. And he says to King Ahab, the evil King Ahab, that there's going to be no rain in the country. No rain for a few years until the moment that Elijah says it's going to rain again. And without rain, it's pretty serious, because how are they going to grow all the food they need? Because no rain equals no food, okay? Not just baguettes, but no food at all. No rain equals no food. And so the people are hungry, properly hungry. They are starving. And as we go through the story, we find out that this problem comes because God has shown that the pretend gods cannot help them. That only the one true, real God can look after them. And in our story, we see God look after his messenger, Elijah, in some surprising ways. So he tells him to go to this random valley miles away where he says there's a brook, a little stream, and he says you can drink from the stream. And that's quite surprising, I suppose. But even more surprising is, do you know how he's going to get his food? Ravens. Ravens are going to come and bring him his food. So birds like this, big black birds, ravens, are going to come and bring him bread and meat each day. And who knows where they get it from, where they pick it up from, but the delivery is going to turn up. The delivery bird is turning up each night by the brook and in the morning and dropping off meat and bread to Elijah twice a day. So he drinks from the stream. It keeps him going. The delivery birds bring him his food. That keeps him going. And then trouble strikes. The brook, the stream, dries up. There's no water left. What is he going to do? Now, if getting your dinner delivered by birds isn't surprising enough, what we're going to see in the story as we move on through our time together is God provides food for him in an even more surprising way. Even more surprising than getting your food delivered by birds, okay? And there are lots of surprising things in our world, aren't there? And to help us think about surprising things a little bit more, Tom is going to introduce us to a little game. And I'm going to let him introduce what it's called. Right, brilliant. Back to our story. And remember where we're at. Elijah has no water left. And remember I said that God tells him to do something even more surprising than going to drink from a brook or a stream and being brought food by bird delivery. Okay, here it comes. I'm going to read one sentence from the Bible passage we're looking at today, and you've got to try and spot two really surprising things, okay? This might be even harder than Tom's game. We're going to help you with it, okay? Two surprising things. Here's the line. So verses 8 and 9, then the word of the Lord came to him, that's Elijah, go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food. Okay? Two surprises. The word of the Lord, that means God spoke to Elijah, his messenger, and said to him, go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food. Okay? Two surprising things. There's a surprising place and a surprising person. Here's the surprising place. Zarephath. Anyone ever been to Zarephath? Didn't think so. No. Zarephath, why is it surprising? Well, remember that evil king Ahab, who we said was directing them away from other gods, to worship pretend gods? Do you know where he got such a bad idea from? Well, he was married to a lady called Jezebel, who came from the region of Sidon here. So when we read this in the Bible and we see two things coming up, it makes us think there's a clue here, okay? A region of Sidon, the Bible writer tells us where the place is, Zarephath, in the region of Sidon. And we're supposed to go, Sidon? No way! No way, why would you go there? That is the last place God should send his messenger to. It's like saying, Elijah, go to No Hope Town. That's where you're going to find stuff. Go to No Hope Town. This place where they worship other gods who won't be able to help. Go there, Elijah. That's surprise one. Oh, No Hope Town. There we go. That appeared unexpectedly. Good. Another surprise. Good. Surprising place. A surprising person. Second thing. So we're going to need to jump back on the slides, I think, for this. A surprising person, a widow. That's a lady whose husband had died. And in that culture, that would mean that there would be very little help available to her, and she would be very, very, very poor. It would be extremely desperate. It would have meant she would have hardly anything. And she is the last person you'd want to send someone who's starving and thirsty to. The last person you'd send to. So a surprising place. Go to Zarephath, No Hope Town. A surprising person, a widow. And that's what God tells Elijah to do. Go to No Hope Town and find a widow. And that seems a bit bonkers. What's going on there?
So as we read from that true story from the Bible, we've seen God's amazing, amazing kindness on display, that he gives the prophet and the widow enough oil and flour. He rescues the widow and her son, those that you wouldn't expect. I guess if you've been at school or if you're at work, a lot of people in our world don't really think that the God of the Bible is very kind at all. That he's angry and that he's mean and he doesn't really like us. But this true story of the oil, of the son being raised, shows us that this is so unbelievably different. And I don't know if you knew, but this story about this widow is actually famous. It's not just a random story in the Bible. Rather, it's a story that Jesus himself talks about. And he talks about this woman. And he talks about how this rescue of this woman is actually just what God is always doing. That's what God does. He gives surprising rescues. And that's no longer through the prophet Elijah, but through Jesus. And from the very beginning, Jesus' mission was to rescue those who had no hope. To rescue those like that widow that we've seen in our story. Jesus spent time with all sorts of people, and he spent time with the people that we wouldn't expect. He didn't spend time with the rich or the powerful. No, instead, what he did is he went towards the lost, towards those that were hopeless. Who does he spend time with? He spends time with a sinful woman who he lets her wash his feet. Shocking and surprising. He spends time with people who are crippled, who can't walk. He spends time with a man called Zacchaeus, who everybody hated. But that's the kind of person that Jesus hangs out with, spends time with. And that was something that so many people in Jesus' day noticed and were shocked by. And in fact, it says, and hopefully on the next slide, that some Pharisees, some of the religious people who looked upon Jesus and saw what he was doing, said, and what stood out to them about him was that this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. Time and time and time again, the people that were most unlikely to come to Jesus, the people that we think, they wouldn't be Jesus' friends, well, they were those that he welcomed in. Those were the ones that he opened his arms and said, come on in, come and be my friend. And at Junior Church a few weeks ago, I think I can peek at a few. I can see a few people who were at Junior Church a few weeks ago, and we looked at a story about God the Father, and we looked at a story about a younger brother who hopefully is going to come up on our screen. You'll see, this is some of my fantastic word art. You'll see, not word art, clip art. You'll see, we saw a few weeks ago, we looked at the parable of the lost son, and we saw how a boy ran away from his father. He went and did everything that he wanted, and then he found himself with pigs in a pigsty. He'd lost everything. He had no hope. He had become a complete nobody. And when he came back to the father, when he realized his mistake and came back to the father didn't shout at him or tell him off. He wasn't angry with him. No, instead, what the father did is he welcomed him with open arms and said, come and join me. Come and celebrate with me. My son was lost and is found. That's what our God is like. That's what Jesus is like. And he rescues those with no hope because, well, he is just so kind. That's just what he loves to do. Jesus is so kind to those that don't deserve it, to those who've run far away from him. And that is the best news in the world. That is absolutely the best news in the world. Because it means that nobody, absolutely nobody, is too far away from Jesus' rescue. I don't know whether you can think of a family member, maybe a brother or a sister, or an uncle or a cousin, or grandma or granddad, and you can think of, and they just want nothing to do with Jesus. And that is something that can make us feel really sad, can't it? Whether we're young and old, and yet because God is so kind, that person is never too far away. And that is a surprise. That might be a surprise to us, that Jesus saves many unlikely people. That person is never too far away. Or maybe you can think of someone at school or at work who you've talked to about Jesus, but actually they want nothing to do with him. They think he's ridiculous. They think following Jesus, what a load of nonsense. Well, what might be a surprise to us again is that person is never too far away because of God's kindness. He wants to rescue the most unlikely people. And it may be that you're sitting here, and it might be that you're sitting here today, and you actually just feel, I've had a rubbish week. And that you maybe think, I've been unkind to my brother or my sister. I've not listened at school. I've said this thing to this person that I love, and I'm really sad about it, and really feel really bad about it. Well, and maybe we think, God doesn't love me anymore. Well, wonderfully, Jesus is so, so kind, even those who don't deserve it. And towards you and me, he is so kind that he promises that if we come to him, as we were singing about, if we come to him, we will be forgiven and we can be his friend. I think the big surprise of Jesus is on our screen. The big surprise of Jesus is that his mission is to rescue lost people with no hope. And that is the best news in the world. The best news in the world, because nobody is too far away from his love and kindness.
Let's open our Bibles again to page 358. And chapter 17, worth having it in front of you because we're just going to look back at the last few verses of chapter 16 as well. And last week, for those who are around, we rattled through 10 kings across 3 chapters, and the verdict was, in Israel, particularly the northern kingdom, they get worse and worse and worse, and we're left with Ahab, who is the worst of the bunch. And let's read again, just to remind ourselves of that, chapter 16, from verse 30. So you just have to go back over the page to get the first sentence. Just to remind ourselves, Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. He not only considered it trivial to commit the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, but he also married Jezebel, daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and began to serve Baal and worship him. He set up an altar for Baal in the temple of Baal that he built in Samaria. Ahab also made an Asherah pole, did more to arouse the anger of the Lord, the God of Israel, than did all the kings of Israel before him. And we get here at this end of chapter 16, it's the very worst situation. Over chapter 17 and then into 18, we get basically this big challenge set up. As Israel have become more and more divided in their worship, so much so that their king isn't just kind of messing around a bit with foreign. He's wholeheartedly in worshipping Baal. We get to this point and we go, who's it going to be then? Who are you going to follow? Who is the real king? Who's the one worth following? And here we get the first challenge. Is it Baal, the real deal, or is it Yahweh, the true God of Israel? And the first challenge is who is in charge of the rain? Second one, chapter 18, which we'll pick up at some point in the future, is a fiery one. But for this one, who is in charge of the rain? And the thing that is worth knowing about Baal is that Baal is a fertility god. So it's Baal who is kind of, that they would praise for being the one who brought the rain, who gave them fertile crops. So Baal is basically a god of rain. So what's going on here is God saying through Elijah, okay, Baal brings you rain, see what happens the next few years. Will you have rain? Will you have to, without me saying so? Or will you not? And as we get this kind of section, first the rain, then the next chapter as well, and we're held up with this challenge, who's the one true God to follow? I guess we know the answer is to the question, who should we really be trusting? The obvious answer is the one true God. And perhaps the question then to us, for us to just consider for a few moments is, are you trusting him? Now, for some of us in the room, there'll be a simple no to that. You know you're not trusting him. You're here trying to find out more about him. Some of us might not be sure. We're trying to kind of work things through. I guess for many, there'll be a simple, yes, I am trusting him. And if that's the case, a good question for us to be considering, as we see this kind of progression through those kings, is what is there other than the Lord that is pulling at your heart so that you're feeling the tension, such that you're feeling the tension? What is there in the world that is pulling on your heart so that you're in danger of that divided heart that is at the beginning? Perhaps a couple of things to ponder to help us get there. Is, first one, what fills this sentence for you? Okay, up on the screen. It'll be okay as long as what? What is it that fills that sentence for you? Is it your health, or your work, or your stability, or your family, or friends, or your spouse? It'll be okay as long as what? Second question, maybe, to help us think about this further is, what are you hearing in his word and holding at arm's length? What is it that you're hearing in God's word and holding at arm's length? Is it something to do with our lifestyle, perhaps? Or the reality of his judgment we've looked at quite a bit in the last few weeks? Or his love for you, his forgiveness for you? See, in this 1 Kings section, we've seen again and again that God's word stands firm. What he says happens will happen. And this chapter 17 is no different. So I've just flashed up on the screen here all the times that God's word is mentioned in chapter 17. And you can see them there. It's quite a lot, isn't it? That God speaks and stuff happens. Verses 1, verse 2, verse 8, what have we got? 14, 16, 24. It happens again and again. There's this theme here, God's word. You can trust God's word. And we see it in different ways. So the first way we see it is God's word in judgment. To Ahab, this God of rain that people are worshipping, Elijah says, verse 1, to Ahab, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word. And there's this severe drought, of course, that we've seen. And we see that more in the next chapter as well. And we see that as this word comes to Elijah, there's actually God's judgment coming on the people here. God's word, you can trust in judgment, because we see this drought play out. Here, chapter 17. Chapter 18, it gets so desperate that Ahab's sending off for people to search for grass, because he wants to give some grass to his horses. There's no grass anywhere in the land. You can trust God's word in judgment. But we also see this week that you can trust God's word in grace. And we've seen how he provides here for his prophet Elijah, how he provides through the brook and the bread and the meat and through to the widow. And we've seen that grace to the widow. And we talked about No Hope Land. And one of the guys who writes about this book, a guy called Dale Ralph Davis, talks about how this is like sending Elijah to Baalsville in Gentile land. You know, he really hams it up. This is like the most unlikely place. But of course, God doesn't work in the ways you'd expect. There's a judgment on Israel, and God sends his grace to this unlikely widow. And this is God's way, isn't it? This is God's way, going to the least and the unlikely. And that's always been his mission. It's always his mission of grace. And we can trust his word in that. His favor is never earned. It's always received. It was the case for the people of Israel. We saw it to the widow's son. Abundant grace. And Tom referred earlier to how this passage is picked up in the New Testament. I thought it might help us just to see this grace fleshed out. Luke chapter 4, up on the screen. Here's Jesus, and he is talking in the synagogue in his hometown in Nazareth. And Jesus says, "Truly I tell you, no prophet is accepted in his hometown. I assured you that there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's time, when the sky was shut for 3.5 years, and there was a severe famine throughout the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them, but to a widow in Zarephath in the region of Sidon." His point here is that God's favor goes beyond Israel. And the response here from the people is they are raging, they're furious. They try and throw Jesus off the edge of a cliff. And you get one of my favorite verses in the Bible, which is just Jesus just turned around and walked through them, or something like that. And you just think, oh, wow, what's he like? These people trying to throw him off the cliff. But the point that they understood is God's grace goes to beyond who you expect. Or there's another a similar passage in Matthew chapter 15 where Jesus is talking to a Canaanite woman. And notice verse 21, the region that he's in, Tyre and Sidon. This Canaanite woman, so outside of the Jewish land. And she comes to him crying for mercy. And there's all these echoes of 1 Kings 17 going on. Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. And what does Jesus do? Well, there's this dialogue in that passage where it's made very clear as Jesus says, oh, no, I'm not going to do anything. I'm only for the lost sheep of Israel. And she persists. It's made very clear that we're supposed to see her Gentile nature right in front of our eyes. And we see again that it's by her faith that her daughter is healed. Who's the most unlikely person in your own mind to receive his grace? A friend, family member, a colleague, perhaps even yourself. Here's the wonder of the cross. As Jesus dies, a way is made for the very least likely people to come to God. God's word in grace. And finally, God's word that we can trust. The widow's response is clearly a response of trust in verse 24. In verse 12, when Elijah first comes, she says to him, "As surely as the Lord your God lives." It's not seen as her God, it's Elijah's God. And yet in verse 24, those verses that Tom and Andrea helped us to see, "I know that you're a man of God, and the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth." Here, most likely thing, I think, is her here putting her faith in Yahweh. And so as we've gone through our short series in 1 Kings, we've seen that the Lord's word is trustworthy. You can trust him in judgment, in grace. You can follow him. We've seen that the events of history are subject to the word of the Lord. As Israel's kingdom splits in two, we've seen that God is in control over every little bit. The rulers of this world are subject to God's word, as are we in the big and in the small. We've seen God's word speak against man-made religion and idolatry. And we've seen fulfillment in his judgment of sin throughout. And we've seen that his word of grace is entirely trustworthy. So just before we sing to finish, the question is, do you trust him? Do you trust him? Do you trust him? Will you trust him when your health fails, when your work fails, when you lose your stability? Do you trust him When you can't see why he calls you to live in a way contrary to the world around you, with your money, with your gifts, with your affections, do you trust him? Then he says one day he's going to come in judgment. And do you trust him when he says that he loves you deeply, that he longs for you, that for his followers not one thing is held against your name, that he looks on you and smiles? And do you trust that one day everything in this world will be made new, that justice will be done, pain and sorrow and death will be no more? And if you're following him, whether you're thriving in the Christian life or whether you're clinging on by your fingernails, that you will spend eternity in his presence. Do you trust him?